"You're no longer part of this house," Lisa said, her tone deceptively calm, as if she were delivering the weather forecast instead of appending my entire world. "Before we start the story, leave a comment telling us where you are watching from, and at the end don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10, enjoy the story." I paused in the kitchen, the sunlight streaming through the blinds casting long shadows across the oak floor, feeling the words settle like stones in my chest. My hands, accustomed to decades of cooking and setting tables for family gatherings, rested briefly on the marble countertop as I took a measured breath. I had lived in this house for 40 years, every room imbued with memories of laughter, birthdays, holidays, and quiet mornings with Mark, my son. The very thought of being told I could no longer call this place home was surreal. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I walked slowly to the living room, noting how the furniture, the grand sofa, the walnut coffee table, the shelves lined with framed photographs, looked the same yet somehow alien. Each picture seemed to stare at me, a silent witness to decades of devotion, now shadowed by betrayal. I remembered how Mark had once crawled into my lap after a nightmare, his small hand gripping mine, and now, at 38, he barely glanced in my direction, his attention tethered firmly to Lisa. I poured a cup of tea from the kettle I had polished that morning, the steam curling lazily above the cup, and I sat down without a word, allowing the weight of their actions to settle. I had prepared myself for grief when Mark's father passed, for the quiet ache of absence, but not for this, the deliberate erasure from the home I had nurtured and maintained. I noticed the fine lines around Lisa's eyes as she smoothed her blonde hair back, the practiced smile that did not reach her eyes. She carried herself with precision, each movement calculated, and yet, to her, it seemed, this was entirely reasonable. I leaned back in my chair, taking in the warmth of the afternoon sun, feeling the familiar scent of lavender from the window planter, and allowed a subtle, quiet clarity to settle in. Every piece of this house, every floorboard, every doorknob, had been tended with care, and the thought that they could try to sever me from it stirred a cautious resolve. I set the cup down, the porcelain ringing softly, and in that moment, I understood that my reaction needed to be measured, deliberate. I would not scream or cry, I would observe, gather, and plan. Lisa might have thought she had cornered me, that her assertion would elicit fear or compliance, but what I felt was a sharpened awareness. This house was more than walls and a roof, it was a record of a life lived, and I would not allow its significance to be dismissed lightly. As Lisa glanced at her phone and Mark shifted uncomfortably, I let my gaze drift to the framed certificates and awards on the wall, each a testament to years of dedication, community involvement, and shared accomplishments. In silence, I began to assemble a mental map of the documents, the keys, the trusted contacts, the bank statements, everything that would later reveal the truth of ownership and intent. I sipped the tea, letting the bitterness steady my pulse, and allowed myself a faint, knowing smile. The game had begun, and though they saw only a frail grandmother sitting quietly, inside, a calculated patience had already taken root. The morning sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, highlighting the faint dust motes drifting in the air, and Jane sat at the small round table with her tea, tracing the rim of her cup with a calm, deliberate hand. The house was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic from the street outside and the occasional chirp of a bird landing on the window ledge. Each room she glanced at carried memories, from the living room where Mark had learned to walk, to the study where she and her husband had pored over bills and plans for the future. Now, alone, the silence felt heavier, yet it afforded her the space to observe carefully, to notice the subtle shifts that had occurred over the years without her immediate recognition. The mail had arrived earlier, and she had placed the letters on the counter, opening each with measured care. A utility notice here, a statement there, each envelope revealing the rhythms of household life she had maintained, and through them, hints of changes orchestrated by Lisa. Jane did not rush, she did not allow frustration to dictate her movements. She catalogued details in her mind, the slight change in the arrangement of the living room furniture, the way Mark avoided discussing certain documents, the missing papers she had last handled. Her gaze drifted to the bookshelf where family photographs were lined meticulously, each smile captured frozen in time, a reminder of the years she had devoted to nurturing relationships, ensuring traditions were honored, and providing support quietly but steadfastly. In one photograph, Mark had clutched a small trophy, his grin wide and innocent, unaware of the adult schemes that would later complicate the life she had built. Jane sipped her tea slowly, savoring the warmth, letting the calm focus her thoughts. She made note of the subtle misalignments, the missing checks, the irregularities in correspondence, the quiet shift in household routines. She opened a notebook, beginning a careful record, not with accusations, but with facts she could verify, preparing for the moment when clarity would be essential. Her mind wandered briefly to Emily, her bright-eyed granddaughter, who had visited last week and mentioned in passing how Lisa had questioned the arrangement of certain family documents. That small observation, offhand as it seemed, now felt like a crucial piece in a broader pattern. Jane closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself, letting patience and observation replace anger and confusion. She understood that control was exercised through information, through the careful orchestration of perception, and she would counter with knowledge, quiet yet precise. The house, her life, her decades of stewardship, were not hers only in sentiment but in records, in legal rights, in the meticulous attention she had paid to details often overlooked by others. She began to map out a timeline of events in her mind, from the moment she noticed the subtle shifts in Mark's attention, to Lisa's carefully managed interactions, to the small but deliberate changes in documents and daily routines. Each step, she realized, was a puzzle piece that fit into a larger strategy she had yet to fully uncover. Yet, she felt no panic, only a measured resolve to gather evidence, to understand fully before making a move. The clock ticked steadily, a reminder that time continued even when plans were disrupted, and Jane used that steady rhythm as a framework to organize her thoughts. Every sip of tea, every glance around the room, reinforced her clarity. She would not be hurried, she would not be manipulated, and she would uncover the truth of Lisa's intentions with the patience and precision she had honed over a lifetime of careful observation. Jane moved through the house with quiet precision, her eyes scanning each room for details she had learned to notice over decades of living here. The morning light touched the edges of the curtains, creating patterns on the carpet that seemed almost deliberate, like the house itself was holding its breath. She walked past the piano where Mark had learned to play, each key worn slightly from years of practice, and ran her fingers along the polished wood without making a sound. She thought of the small notes she had tucked inside the drawers, reminders of repairs done, bills paid, and improvements made, all evidence of her stewardship. Every step she took was deliberate, each observation recorded in her mind, as she began piecing together the sequence of events that had led to this moment. The kitchen smelled faintly of the herbal tea she had prepared earlier, a calm counterpoint to the turmoil she felt inwardly. Jane recalled conversations with Emily, her granddaughter, who had casually mentioned odd behavior from Lisa, comments that now seemed loaded with intent. Jane did not act hastily, she understood the value of patience and quiet observation. Sitting down at the desk in the study, she spread out the legal documents she had retrieved, running her eyes over each line, noting inconsistencies, signatures, and dates, mentally marking those that required further investigation. She remembered the afternoon when Lisa had insisted on reorganizing the shelves, claiming it was for convenience, and she now saw how minor manipulations had been orchestrated to obscure the truth. Jane sipped her tea again, letting the warmth ground her, and began to write a timeline, starting with the smallest details, each an important piece of the larger puzzle. She thought of Mark, unaware of the subtleties unfolding, his trust in Lisa unquestioning, and it reinforced her resolve to act with precision rather than confrontation. The afternoon stretched on, light shifting as the sun moved across the sky, casting new angles in the rooms she knew intimately. Jane walked to the window overlooking the front yard, watching the branches of the oak tree sway gently, a serene rhythm that contrasted sharply with the mental calculations she was performing. She listed contacts she could consult if needed, neighbors, financial advisors, and the family lawyer who had always respected her judgment. In this quiet scrutiny, she found clarity, a calm determination that replaced the initial shock with purpose. Each observation added depth to her understanding of the underlying strategies at play, and Jane felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that her patience and attention to detail were creating an advantage invisible to those around her. As the day drew on, she continued cataloging, cross-referencing, and planning, every movement measured, every thought deliberate, building the foundation for the moment when the carefully assembled facts would speak for themselves, ensuring that her rights, her home, and her years of careful management would be acknowledged and respected. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting a golden hue across the hardwood floors and illuminating the fine dust that floated silently in the air. Jane stood in the hallway, her hands resting lightly on the banister, letting her gaze linger on the framed memories lining the walls. Each photograph told a story, a fragment of time captured in stillness, and she traced the faces of Mark, her late husband, and family gatherings long past, allowing herself to recall the laughter, the whispered conversations, and the quiet evenings filled with shared comfort. The house felt alive with memory, yet heavy with the unspoken tension that had settled since the morning. Jane moved through the rooms deliberately, her footsteps soft against the carpet, noting the subtle alterations that Lisa had made under the guise of normal household management. A cushion shifted slightly from its usual place, a book rearranged on the shelf, a document left in a new drawer, all small, almost imperceptible signs, yet they told a story to those who knew what to observe. Jane returned to the study, pulling out a carefully maintained binder where she had stored receipts, correspondences, and notes spanning decades. She methodically compared each item, verifying dates and signatures, the quiet satisfaction of understanding growing with every checkmark. Outside, the wind stirred the branches of the oak tree, leaves brushing against the window with a soft, rhythmic rustle that mirrored the meticulous pace she set for herself. Jane took a seat at the desk, the familiar creak of the chair a comforting acknowledgement of continuity, and began to assemble a sequence of events in her mind, connecting subtle actions and minor omissions into a coherent narrative. Mark had been unaware, absorbed in his own life and trusting Lisa to manage matters he assumed under control. Jane considered her next steps, focusing on clarity and patience, understanding that the smallest misstep could disrupt the careful advantage she had cultivated. She sipped her tea, the warmth grounding her as she visualized the conversation with the family lawyer, anticipating questions and preparing facts in her mind. Every detail mattered, dates, locations, correspondences, even the tone of previous conversations, all compiled mentally into a strategic overview. Jane allowed herself a moment of reflection, thinking back to the years spent nurturing her home, supporting family milestones, and fostering trust. The quiet revelation of manipulation did not bring anger but instead reinforced her determination to act with precision and forethought. Each room she glanced at, each object she handled, reminded her that she had accumulated knowledge, awareness, and an unshakable connection to the home she had built and maintained. As the shadows lengthened, Jane continued her methodical review, her mind clear, her resolve firm, knowing that the forthcoming steps would be guided not by emotion but by a careful, deliberate strategy that ensured the truth would be recognized, and the integrity of her years of stewardship preserved. Jane rose from the study chair and walked slowly toward the front of the house, her footsteps silent against the polished oak floors. The late afternoon light filtered through the sheer curtains, casting gentle patterns that shifted as the breeze moved the branches outside. She paused at the doorway, surveying the living room where family photographs, heirlooms, and books lined the shelves, each item a testament to years of careful attention and cherished memories. Her gaze settled on the small stack of unopened letters on the coffee table, each one an opportunity to understand the recent subtle shifts in the household. She picked up the top envelope and examined it carefully, noting the postmark and the sender, then placed it back without opening, realizing that patience was as much a tool as observation. Jane moved to the dining room, tracing her fingers along the polished surface where countless meals had been shared, recalling moments of laughter and quiet conversation. She thought of Mark and the life they had built together, and though he remained unaware of the manipulations that had been at play, she recognized the importance of gathering irrefutable evidence. Settling at the desk in the corner of the room, Jane pulled out a ledger she had maintained, its pages filled with meticulous records of bills, maintenance, and personal notes, each entry a marker of diligence and foresight. She cross-referenced dates and details, mentally noting discrepancies and creating a timeline in her mind. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of the garden, blooming with late summer flowers, grounding her senses as she catalogued her observations. She considered Emily, her perceptive granddaughter, whose casual remarks had revealed small cracks in Lisa's careful presentation. Each comment, though seemingly minor at the time, now formed part of the larger pattern Jane was piecing together. She sipped her tea, allowing the warmth to steady her pulse and sharpen her focus, her thoughts methodically arranging the evidence she had gathered. Jane moved from room to room, her mind mapping interactions, rearrangements, and overlooked details, building a comprehensive understanding of Lisa's actions and their implications. As shadows lengthened and the light softened, Jane allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection, appreciating the clarity that had emerged through observation, patience, and careful attention to the smallest of details. She understood that every subtle change, every shifted object, every word spoken or withheld was part of a larger narrative that she now held in her grasp. With deliberate calm, she prepared herself for the eventual meeting with the lawyer, confident that her preparation and methodical approach would reveal the truth, affirm her rights, and demonstrate that years of vigilance and care could not be undone by deception or haste. The house remained tranquil, a silent witness to her resolve, as Jane mentally rehearsed the steps she would take, ensuring that when the time came, she would act with precision, clarity, and unwavering confidence. Jane had prepared for this day with meticulous care, reviewing every document and retracing every action taken over the past weeks. The sun had dipped lower, painting the rooms with a warm amber glow that seemed to highlight each familiar detail of the house she had called home for decades. She moved from the study to the living room, placing the neatly organized stack of papers on the coffee table, her fingers adjusting each page with deliberate precision. She had observed the patterns, the subtle shifts in Lisa's behavior, the casual remarks that had hinted at intentions to claim authority, and she now felt a quiet confidence in understanding the full scope. Jane poured herself another cup of tea, the faint aroma of chamomile filling the room, grounding her thoughts and sharpening her awareness. She reviewed her mental checklist, documents verified, witnesses aware, timeline of events established, and potential questions anticipated for the upcoming meeting. Outside, the garden reflected the late summer light, flowers swaying gently as if in acknowledgement of her steady resolve. Jane paused to look at a photograph of Mark as a child, remembering the nights she had stayed up reading stories, the mornings spent teaching him to tie his shoes, the countless moments of guidance and care that had built the foundation of her family. Her focus shifted back to the present. The meticulous preparation was not just for her own reassurance but to ensure clarity and authority in the room she would soon enter. She thought of the family lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, who had always shown respect for her judgment and dedication, and she anticipated the precise moment when the facts would be revealed. Jane's movements were methodical. She organized her notes, reviewed the key points, and rehearsed her explanations, all in quiet contemplation. She understood that patience and composure were her greatest tools, that reacting with haste or emotion could undermine the careful strategy she had developed. As the late afternoon shadows lengthened across the floor, Jane allowed herself a moment of reflection, appreciating the clarity that had emerged from careful observation, the depth of understanding gained from attention to detail. Each piece of information, each small revelation, had contributed to a growing sense of control and readiness. She placed the final sheet of paper on top of the stack and straightened her posture, feeling the subtle shift from preparation to action. In the soft, ambient light, the house seemed to hold its breath, mirroring the calm intensity she felt within. Jane knew that when the time came to meet with Mr. Caldwell, every observation, every careful note, every subtle discovery would converge, allowing her to navigate the conversation with authority, precision, and unwavering clarity. She sipped her tea once more, letting the warmth settle her, and quietly reviewed the sequence of events in her mind, ensuring that nothing was overlooked and that she was ready to move with deliberate intent. The evening light had softened, spilling a warm glow across the study as Jane carefully stacked her notes, each one meticulously organized to track the sequence of events and subtle actions she had observed over the past weeks. She ran her fingers along the edge of the polished desk, feeling the smooth surface beneath her touch, grounding her thoughts as she mentally rehearsed the conversation she would have with Mr. Caldwell. Every detail mattered, the exact wording of previous statements, the order of documents, the timing of Lisa's subtle adjustments to household arrangements, and the few remarks from Mark that had hinted at his unawareness. Jane's mind moved through the events chronologically, cataloging the minor yet telling inconsistencies, the misfiled papers, and the small but deliberate changes that had been made without her knowledge. She poured herself another cup of tea, letting the aroma fill the room, a comforting constant amid the tension of anticipation. In the living room, the shadows stretched long across the hardwood floors, touching the corners where photographs of family milestones stood silently, witnesses to decades of care and devotion. Jane glanced at each frame, letting the memories reinforce her determination to act with patience and precision rather than emotion. She reflected on the quiet guidance she had offered Mark over the years, the values instilled, the trust extended, now contrasted against the subtle manipulations she had uncovered. The clock ticked steadily, and Jane let the rhythm guide her thoughts, organizing facts and recollections into a coherent narrative. She considered the timing of each observation, the nuances of Lisa's behavior, and the importance of presenting her evidence calmly and systematically. Each sip of tea sharpened her focus, allowing her to visualize the steps ahead, anticipating questions, and preparing responses without haste or agitation. The house, filled with the familiar scents and quiet ambience of late afternoon, seemed to reinforce her sense of control, a silent companion to her measured strategy. Jane moved through the study once more, straightening papers, reviewing her notes, and rehearsing mentally the order of presentation, ensuring nothing was overlooked. The evening breeze through the windows brought a fresh scent of the garden, mingling with the faint aroma of chamomile, reminding her of continuity and calm amidst the complexity of the situation. She allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to form, not from triumph yet, but from the clarity that had emerged through careful observation and methodical preparation. Every element, from the arrangement of furniture to the timeline of events, contributed to the growing confidence that when the moment came to confront the facts, she would be fully prepared, poised, and unwavering in her determination to ensure that the truth and her rightful place within the family home would be recognized and respected. The late afternoon had given way to evening, the house bathed in a soft, golden light that lingered in every corner and crevice, casting long shadows across the familiar furnishings. Jane sat at the edge of the sofa, a gentle breeze drifting through the open window, carrying with it the faint scent of roses from the garden outside. Her eyes moved from the stack of meticulously organized papers on the coffee table to the framed photographs lining the walls, each capturing moments of shared joy and quiet reflection that had filled this home for decades. She thought of Mark, absorbed in his own life, unaware of the subtle machinations that had been unfolding, and she considered how important it was to present the truth with clarity, patience, and measured intent. Jane reached for her tea, the warmth of the cup anchoring her focus as she reviewed in her mind the sequence of events, the minor adjustments, and the words spoken in passing that had hinted at Lisa's plans. Each detail, though small, now formed a coherent picture, revealing the careful orchestration that had been intended to obscure the facts from her. She moved to the desk in the corner, opening the ledger and tracing her fingers along the neat lines of handwriting, checking dates, signatures, and notes, confirming what she already suspected and preparing for the moment when clarity would be paramount. The soft rustle of leaves outside and the distant hum of the neighborhood settled around her, a serene backdrop to the deliberate mental preparation she conducted. Jane considered the upcoming meeting with Mr. Caldwell, envisioning how each document would be presented, each question anticipated, each observation subtly highlighted, allowing the evidence itself to speak with authority. She allowed herself a moment to reflect on the patience and care that had brought her to this point, understanding that the quiet vigilance she had maintained over the years was her greatest asset, that careful observation and methodical preparation could achieve what confrontation or emotion could not. The sunlight faded gradually, replaced by the gentle glow of indoor lamps, and Jane moved through the living room one final time, noting the positions of chairs, the placement of the photographs, the arrangement of documents, all in a quiet rehearsal of precision and control. Each step, each glance, each adjustment reinforced the calm confidence that had been cultivated, ensuring that when the time came to reveal the truth, she would do so with unwavering clarity and authority. Jane sipped the final portion of her tea, feeling a quiet sense of readiness settle over her, knowing that the careful preparation, the attention to nuance, and the methodical gathering of facts would soon converge to restore order, acknowledge her years of stewardship, and demonstrate that patience, precision, and clarity were as powerful as any overt action. The house, filled with memories and the gentle ambience of evening, seemed to echo her composed determination, a silent companion as she awaited the moment when all would be revealed and the integrity of her life within these walls recognized and respected. The morning of the meeting arrived with a quiet stillness that filled the house, sunlight streaming through the windows and casting long shadows across the familiar furniture. Jane moved slowly through the rooms, making sure everything was in order, each photograph and document exactly where it needed to be. The air was calm, carrying the faint scent of coffee and lavender from the small arrangement on the dining table. She took a deep breath, letting the warmth of the cup in her hand steady her thoughts and focus her mind. Every detail she had observed over the past days now coalesced into a clear understanding, a map of subtle actions, deliberate omissions, and carefully placed words. Jane knew that patience and precision had been her greatest allies, and now the moment to bring the facts into the open had arrived. She reviewed her notes one final time, mentally rehearsing the sequence of events and the key points that needed to be emphasized to Mr. Caldwell. Her gaze drifted to the photograph of Mark as a child, the memory of his innocent laughter a grounding reminder of the family she had nurtured, even as she prepared to confront the consequences of the recent manipulations. Jane rose, straightened her posture, and carried the carefully assembled documents to the car, each step measured and deliberate. The drive to the lawyer's office was quiet, the familiar streets of the neighborhood passing by without distraction, allowing her mind to remain focused and unhurried. Upon arrival, Jane noticed the calm professionalism of Mr. Caldwell's office, the subtle order that reflected his methodical approach, a space she trusted to handle matters with fairness. She laid out the documents, referencing the notes she had prepared, and observed Lisa's reaction as she entered, noting the slight tension in posture, the careful smile that masked concern. Jane remained composed, her expression steady, her voice clear and deliberate as she explained the sequence of events, the inconsistencies she had catalogued, and the subtle manipulations she had observed. Mr. Caldwell listened intently, asking clarifying questions, and Jane provided precise, calm answers, her preparation allowing the facts to stand unchallenged. Lisa's attempts to interject were met with Jane's unwavering composure, the weight of carefully documented observations making each assertion credible and indisputable. The reading of the trust and house deed unfolded, and Jane noted the shift in the room, the recognition of her rightful position, the authority she had maintained through patient attention to detail. As the session concluded, Jane felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of completion rooted not in confrontation but in careful planning, observation, and the disciplined execution of a strategy that honored her years of stewardship and secured the integrity of her home. She left the office with a sense of calm triumph, the familiar streets reflecting back her measured confidence, knowing that the patience, precision, and deliberate actions she had cultivated had ensured that the truth prevailed and that her role within the family home was respected and affirmed.